Hi friends, I wanted to return to this question of there being lots and lots of different INFJs and the INFJ type as such being fluid or more fluid than we think, not rigid. There is certainly resistance being expressed in the community about this idea, and I understand it. It's always an encouragement also to me to be a bit more precise in how I strive to articulate this fluidity, which is a fluidity that is the meaning of infinite in the Infinite Soul. My new book on the INFJ, which you can get out all the links below for a meaningful, purposeful, and a life full of value in a world that is often hostile to us. If you haven't got a copy, it's below. Yes, I think that all things considered, it's probably better to propose a distinction between the NiFe and the INFJ. And you're going to understand in a minute, or less than a minute, what I mean by this. There's no doubt that some things don't change. You can't have, a complete overhaul of what a type means from one generation to the next. Otherwise, we do fall into some kind of nonsensicality, and essentially what it means is that it becomes essentially questionable whether we should talk of types. We might as well in this scenario just have like human nature, and everyone have their different properties and qualities and relating or not to certain kinds of other people. So in my understanding, or in what I propose to articulate with you, is the idea that the NiFe is the person who possesses an NiFe hardware. So again, note the distinction between NiFe hardware and INFJ software. If you like, the NiFe is whatever psychically determines that we have the kind of minds we do as NiFes. And of course, when I say NiFe, it's always a shortcut for NiFe-TISE, but even NiFe is sufficient to already indicate this is what we are, or this is what people who identify as INFJs are. NiFe is something that is unchanging. It's something that is survives across generations and centuries and millennia, and probably has a physical substrate that we don't quite understand based on psychophysical laws that we don't quite understand. It probably has a physical substrate, but at the very least we can say that what I have in common with an NiFe from, say, the age of Jesus Christ is that we are Ni dominants, we are Fe auxiliaries, Ti tertiaries, Se inferior, and that it means certain things. The introversion of intuition, its very particular relationship to the contents of the unconscious, the relationship between Fe and the social world, the particular properties of Ti tertiary. All these things don't change, right? They don't change. But notice that these are not personality traits, right? I wouldn't describe as a personality trait the fact that my dominant function is introverted into my unconscious, and particularly the archetypes in the unconscious. If I met someone and said that's a personality trait that I have, they would look at me funny. They'd be like, no, that's it sounds more like you're describing a particular parameter of your psyche. And they will be right, and that doesn't change, and that's the NiFe for you. Now, out of the possession of this particular NiFe hardware, if you like, there is a way of being in the world which we call INFJ. This is where the INFJ comes into play. Now, I do think that the INFJ, as this way of being in the world, it provides a set of vocabularies, including personality traits that appear to be kind of intrinsic, like being empathic, but also traits that correspond, that are sort of innately dependent or inherently dependent on interactions with other people, like being misunderstood, for example. So, there's a constellation of traits that the INFJ possesses. And that kind of constellation of traits evolves over time. It incorporates new meanings, it incorporates new terms. Maybe it also sometimes, it doesn't dismiss old terms, but sometimes old terms are going to become a bit less common to describe the particular INFJ experience. And this is, I think, again, for two reasons. One reason being that times change, and the coping mechanism of people who are NiFe changes as well, and the self-descriptions partly evolved to reflect that change. And also, the subjective element in type is impossible to eradicate, and we don't really want to eradicate. One way to put it is to say, it is objectively the case, I've said this before, but I'll say it again, it is objectively the case that, that there is an INFJ subjectivity, right? So once you've said that, you sort of both set up the scenario where there is hardware and software. You're saying it's subjectively the case that there is an INFJ subjectivity. So if it's objectively the case, there are unchanging conditions for the existence of that subjectivity, but you're at the same time saying, well, there is an INFJ subjectivity, and that's subjectivity and intersubjectivity among INFJs is going to generate perpetually refined and refreshed and enriched self-descriptions. And those self-descriptions include the personality traits that the INFJ is supposed to possess. Now, I could anticipate one concern here, is that someone who was very, very punctilious or who was very, very finicky might say, well, isn't that dangerous too, to say that like the descriptions of what the INFJ is as a way of being can change, because then, never mind the hardware, people could start saying, people who don't all have the hardware that INFJs have, might start just adopting those words and integrate the INFJ community without actually being NiFe. Or even worse, they could lots of people could do that and start changing the vocabulary of INFJ means whilst not being NiFe, and end up kind of contributing to a vocabulary that is a disfigurement of the real NiFe experience. And for this, what I would invoke as a pretty good safeguard, something that people sometimes really underestimate, is just the holism of the NiFe mind. That is reflected in the holism of the INFJ language and vocabulary. To some extent, all languages have this holism. That is to say, like, it's not like you can just add something entirely new to the INFJ vocabulary, and then piecemeal, additionally, you can just add more and more so that it becomes disfigured. No, because the society of INFJs is going to have to validate it, otherwise the language will never get refreshed. So it will have to evoke something in the community of INFJs, which is why what I say in this book, but also what I say in the Ecstatic Soul about alienation and so on, this book, the prequel to the Infinite Soul, is still available as well, so you can get it. Check it out. It's got good reviews and it's well referenced, whereas the Infinite Soul could be better referenced if you review it. So if you haven't reviewed it yet, really consider it, please. Thank you so much. And yeah, like if you like, those sets of descriptions that are fluid, if you like, they're fluid at the boundaries, but they are still holistic. So you can't just change them just like that. Like, that won't happen, right? They will have to be validated by the community. It will have to already fit within a very established age-old vocabulary that people have sanctioned as relating to. So you don't have to make it static and rigid and unchanging, but you can trust in the holism of the web that already holds it together. That's why it's going to change slowly, conservatively in a sense, and it should, because the INFJ experience is not going to become completely other than it is. It can evolve, and the vocabulary will reflect that, but it's not going to become wholly other, and the holism will protect it. Okay, so let me know what you think in the comments, guys, about this little update on the view, and don't forget that Patreon keeps my channel alive. So if you would like to subscribe, become a Patreon supporter, you can join me, and from $3.50 a month, really keeps the channel going. Thank you so much to my supporters. Consider it. It might just save the channel at some point. Okay, take care, guys. Bye bye.